Welcome to Health Hacktivators with lifestyle medicine doctor, GP and longevity expert Dr. Alka Patel. This show will help you to discover a hidden health hacking code that unlocks your phenomenal potential for an outstanding health span, lifespan and wealth span. The show features candid conversations with celebrities, influencers and industry icons, real-life stories and cutting-edge health activating advice that other doctors might not tell you. Discover why now is the time to join the strategic self-care revolution and experience the profound effects this will have on your personal and professional success. Now, here is your host, Dr. Alka Patel.
Hi, hey, and hello, Health Hacktivators. Now, today's show is dedicated to supporting survivors of sexual abuse. And we're about to hear from who I can only describe as a truly inspirational man, Perry Power. Perry survived his own childhood abuse. He's the writer of the best-selling book, Breaking the Silence. He's a TEDx speaker, and he also runs a self-publishing company called Powerful Books, which is very much focused on helping trauma survivors to write and publish their own stories and their own books. Perry is a charity supporter as well. He's co-founded the US-based charity We Rescue Kids, and what they do is give free mental health care to child survivors of sexual abuse. And he's also a trustee for a charity called We Together, which is a UK-based charity. And what that's doing is building a tool that allows victims to self-report and to encourage persecution where appropriate to be escalated. If you're ready for a truly inspiring conversation, welcome to the show, Perry. Before we get into today's show, please do support today's show partner, Youth and Earth. Youth and Earth have a range of products that I love to use myself to supercharge my metabolism, to support my health, and to slow down cellular aging. Just be sure you click the link in the show notes for exclusive offers, which Youth and Earth are so generously giving for listeners of this show. Perry Power, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here. I'm so excited to be speaking to you today.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me on.
My pleasure completely. Now, look, there's obviously lots of things that I want to talk about, and you're an actor, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, you're very used to taking on personas and characters and new identities. And I know there has been a time in your life when you've taken on a new identity, but not in an acting capacity, not when you're acting a role for a stage or the TV or a screen, but in your real life. There was a time when I've heard you describe wearing a mask simply to hide a part of you. Are you able to share that part of you, Perry, that time when you were hiding behind a mask?
Yeah, I remember being in the car, my parents' car. We just sold my nan's house. She just passed away. My dad done it up, sold it. And then that was in London. And then my parents are like, right, let's drive out of London. Let's get a new property because you can get a bigger bang for your buck outside of London, right? So we then moved to Bracknell. And I remember driving to Bracknell. I'm in the car and I'm in my head. I'm like, right, I'm going to a new college. Nobody knows me here. New friends, new everything. So I can be Perry Power 2.0. I can create a character that they would believe. And I'm sure if I'd be that character long enough, I end up believing it, a bit of method acting in a way. And I end up believing it myself. And the Perry Power that people met when I walked into the college room he was a guy that was a player that had slept with loads of girls. He didn't care about anything. He had this I don't care attitude. He rocked up late whenever he wanted to. And he just had that persona, right? The classic, if we're going to talk American, the classic jock persona. But the reason why I was like that and I created that character is because I was the opposite of that, or I felt like I was the opposite of that in my life. I was a guy who didn't have many friends. He was very, very shy. He was a virgin. But he didn't want to be. He wanted to talk to girls. He wanted to, all these types of things. But the reason why he was like that is because he was the boy that was sexually abused as a child by his step granddad. And it happened for over a year. And when he was caught by a family member, then it was put to rest. Wasn't allowed to go around there anymore. It was my stepmom that caught it happening. She took me home. She told my dad. My dad confronted me. And then my dad then said to me, right, you're not going to go around to your nan's house anymore. Okay, you're not going to see them again. but you don't want to go to school, tell your friends. You're not going to tell your biological mother about what happened. You're going to keep this at home between the four walls of this house. We don't want a black cloud over the family name. And then, but at a point in time when he said that, I had no idea the sort of severity of what had happened. I didn't know it was abuse at that age. I thought it was my step-granddad giving me a form of love that no other family member was giving me. I legit thought that's what it was. And so when my dad had that reaction, I'm like, okay, what's going on here? You know. Then I get older and I start to become a teenage boy. Sex is talked about a bit more on the TV amongst friends. Abuse is talked more a little bit in conversation, so I knew what that was, which then forced me to reflect about what happened. And that's when the masks started to appear, because I didn't want to be that boy. You know, shame is the key word in all of this. Shame forced me to wear these masks and to be someone that I wasn't.
Gosh, thank you for sharing that really very honestly and very openly and very vividly as well, Perry. But let me ask you, do you feel that that sort of extraction was enough? Because it sounds as though you at least got extracted from the imminent risk. You got it removed from the situation. Was that enough?
No, because I think as Gabor Mate said it once, I think it was him that said it, that trauma isn't what happened to you, it's the silence that you live in after it's happened to you. And that's why it was enough in regards to the physical of what was happening. But as we know, it's the mental that takes play, right? That creates the most damage. And it was the silence, right? I remember my dad said to me, right, you're not going to speak about this. I was 11 years old and I ended up living in silence for 12 years. You know, and it's the silence that kills people. It's the silence that leads to coping mechanisms, that leads to depression. You know, and so in theory, no, it wasn't enough.
And have you met others? Have you met others who you now see as wearing a mask? Because sometimes all we see of people is their outward behaviors. We don't really see that inner working. So are you able to recognize in others this wearing of a mask? What have you noticed?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like when you've been on one side, it's definitely easier to see other people also on that side with you. But because of how much I share my story, and I share my story every single day in multiple ways, have done for 5 years now, you know, and I've grown an audience of over 350,000 people. You know, I've got massive Facebook group, thousands of people in that, and I have anywhere between low end 10 upwards to about 50 DMs a day, new ones, right, from survivors speaking out to me because they see my content that's gone viral, or they are breaking their silence to me. So I see first-hand accounts of, it's like I'm on the front line seeing this every single day. People sharing me about when they started to wear masks, how long it took for them to remove them, why they still live in the silence, or they've just broken the silence, but now this is what life looks like. Sometimes good, sometimes bad because of family opinions. And hey, you know, you shouldn't be airing your quote-unquote dirty laundry. So it's in answer to your question about seeing people who are wearing masks, even when they're reaching out to me, they're still wearing elements of a mask. And it's a lot easier to see what fragments of a mask are left behind and try to help them to peel those off.
Mm-hmm. You see, there's something kind of very, I guess, partly celebratory in what you've said in terms of you championing the storytelling and the unveiling of the mask and breaking of the silence. But at the same time, there's something deeply saddening to just hear you with those numbers, 50 people every day reaching out to you. And there's something so untold in this covert, hidden world, isn't there? What is it about you that you feel is enabling people to reach out?
I think 1, because I'm a man. 2, because I've got a baby face, so that helps. And I think the main reason is because of how I carry myself and how I tell my story. You know, I don't share my story from a place of pain. There's no pain. You know, I share my story from a place of empowerment. And I come at it from quite a motivational, inspirational sort of angle when I share my story, which allows people to hear my story, but then they don't feel sympathetic. You know, they feel empathetic and they feel inspired to then, hey, okay, if we can do it, then so can I too. And because of the like everything in life, consistency then creates a compound effect, you know, and I've just been consistent with it so long that I've made it impossible for people to ignore it.
Yeah, yeah. But there must have been a pain at some point when that realization initially hit, that innocence of your childhood and not really knowing what this was and thinking it was love and attention. And that moment that realization hit that this wasn't that at all. I mean, what were the painful parts for you?
Yeah, the painful parts was when I was living in silence, for sure. Many elements of that. And then it all sort of came to a front when June the 1st, 2017, my dad, who had become an alcoholic, he had high blood pressure, he had diabetes. He then, an ambulance gets called to the family home, and the paramedics came around and they said, right, we just need to take him to the hospital to even out his blood levels. So we were like, okay, cool, no problem. And then he didn't make it to the hospital. He had a heart attack in the back of the van, and he was 48 years old. And I only found out so I broke my silence in sort of three different ways. The first time was about 6 or so months after that. I broke my silence to my girlfriend at the time, and I told her. Then a few months later, at like a business mastermind event type of thing, there was about 7 or 8 people there. I broke my silence to these guys there, and then driving home, I was like, right, I really now need to get this off my chest in a big way, but I don't want to tell every Tom, Dick, and Harry. I just want to say it once and it's out there. So I did a video and put it on Facebook. And then at the time, for my audience at the time, that went viral. And I then go to my auntie's house, who's my dad's sister, and she says to me, we watched your video. I said, okay. She goes, you know, you weren't the only one who's abused. I said, who? She said, it was you, it was your cousin, it was me, and it was your dad. And then that's when I realized, okay, okay, I understand now of my dad, why my dad told me to keep it a secret, why he told me to watch the Spotlight movie, which was about childhood abuse and covering it up, is why he then became an alcoholic, and he lived and died in silence. And me figuring that out, that was the beginning of 2018. That's when the purpose locked in. I'm like, right, Perry, you're going to help people not go down the same road.
So you've unveiled something super important there, which is the generational trauma. And that gets hidden, and that doesn't get talked about either as well. Do you know anything about your grandfather and great-grandfather?
So one of the reasons, have you seen the Spotlight film?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, about the churches, and
priests. So at the end of that film, they show up a list of areas around the world where there have also been reportings of child molestation in Catholic churches and boarding schools. One of them is Cork Island. And I was pointed out, I ended up meeting up with my step-granddad's daughters when I released my book, because then they went into the media, then they caught my story in the media, reached out to me, never spoken to them before. And I ended up finding out that he abused all of his kids too. And find out that my step-granddad and his brother were put into a Catholic boarding school in Cork Island and was raped and molested by all the priests. And that school, with all the reportings that came out, was part of the reportings that the Spotlight team investigated.
Wow. So, just listening to you, I mean, that adds even more gravitas to what you've done, because what you've done is you've gone, stop. This generational...
It ends with me.
Yeah, it stops here. Wow. What was the catalyst? Because there'll be people listening who, going to resonate with what you're saying, but still don't feel that level of empowerment, safety, ability to do what you've done at the level that you've done, or even at a smaller level. But what for you was the catalyst? Why, when you broke your silence, did you do
that? As in why I broke my silence to begin with?
Yeah, just going back to that moment, those words that came out, what was the trigger behind doing that when you did it?
So I think it was, if you read the book Body Keeps the Score, you find out that trauma takes effect of your body beneath the surface, right, until something pops. And I think it was nearing the popping stage. And what that pop was, I was at home on YouTube, and Lewis Howes had just brought out his book, Mask of Masculinity. And he was on the Ellen DeGeneres show. And she says to him, well, why did you write the book? And he was like, because I was sexually abused as a kid and I grew up wearing masks. And when he said that, it had articulated to me what it was that I had been doing. That character that I created when I moved to Bracknell was actually a series of masks that I had made a decision to start applying to my face, right? And when I realized that, you know, I've been many years, and I think it's just part of my character and part of, like, if there's a problem, if I'm aware that there's a problem, I can't sleep until I've corrected that problem, right? I can't just push it off. So when I found that out, I was like, okay, what do I do to start taking these masks off? I can't sit here and be aware that I'm wearing these masks and continue doing it. So I waited for my girlfriend to come back, and I was like, okay, you're just gonna have to take her out for a walk with your dog and just tell her. That's the only way that I visualize taking my mask off, is just tell her. Now I went out for a walk with her. I don't remember a single word that I told her. Brene Brown says that vulnerability is like standing butt naked in public and everyone's staring at you. That's exactly how I felt when I was with her. You know, I felt like I was naked. I was cold. All the hairs, my body was standing up. And I just said something, which ended up being that's what it was. Luckily, she welcomed me with open arms, right? And but like now, part of my messaging is, when you're living in silence, when it comes to breaking the silence, don't do what I done, because I was lucky, right? You don't go out and tell somebody about what happened. What you need to do is break the silence to yourself first in as many different ways as possible. And then once you've done it in a series of different ways, then you go out and tell someone else. Because when, instead of telling somebody on step one, right, you're going to, in a large way, you're seeking validation from that person. You're seeking approval. You just are. We're human beings. But if you break the silence yourself first as many different ways as possible, then on step number 10, 12, 13, 15, then you tell someone else, that part of you that's seeking validation is going to be a lot smaller, because now you're sitting in a place of power, because you believe you trust you, right? And you're just doing it because you feel like you want to, right? So that's what I tell people to do.
Yeah, gosh, that is super, super powerful, because that act of telling somebody else out loud takes a huge amount of courage and bravado, because you have no idea what that result is going to result in at all. And for you, as you say, it went in a very positive way. But for many, many people, and I'm sure, you know, people who are reaching out to you have shared this, it doesn't go that way. It adds to the shame, it adds to the guilt. And so there's got to be a way of that, having some armor around that before you share. But once you do share in exactly the way that you have, your own vulnerability becomes somebody else's courage, isn't it? Which is incredible. So give us a little bit of how. I mean, when you say share it with yourself first, break your silence to yourself, what does that really mean?
The good thing about this is that there is an abundant amount of ways you can journal, you can write a poem, you can choreograph a dance piece, you could say it in front of a mirror and add words to it, right? You could, then you have strange ones, but they still work. You could go to pottery class and you could make a cup whilst feeling that part of you and allowing those emotions to flow through to the cup that you're molding, for example, because then at the end of it, you have a tangible, right? You have a representation of what your story is. So like I have, outside of, well, it's still in the umbrella of helping survivors, but I also run a business, and it's a publishing company. So we work with trauma survivors to help them write and publish their own book. And that's also a way that they break the silence to themselves. You know, is they spend 3 to 6 months writing a book, and at the end of it, what have they got? They got a book in their hands. And that is a representation of them being a warrior, right? Of the battles that they fought and the person who they are today. So there's so many different ways you can write a song. There's so many different things that you can do. All it is just finding a way to express, because verbally is just one form of expression. Just finding a way to express, do it over and over and over again until you're at a point where you're like, okay, you know, if my mom or my dad reject me, that's unfortunate, and I really hope that they don't, but if they do, it's their loss. You know, that type of attitude, trying to get to that as much as possible.
No, fantastic. And I'm glad you touched on expression as being just fundamental, because you're right. We do think about expression in a very logical way. What we say, what we're going to say, how we're going to say it, how it's going to be received. But there's this whole creative part of expression, movement, what you're making with your hands, what you're transferring from mind to hand to paper. This is all that a very, very creative way of expressing. And I've heard it said many times that depression is lack of expression. And the reason, you know, that your emotions are affected is when you cannot express that inner identity, that inner emotion. And so you sharing different ways of doing that is is very, very powerful, because people don't often think of expressing in that way at all. We think of communication as being fully verbal, but it doesn't.
Absolutely.
Which is incredible. So, wow. So you're talking a lot about your story. I'd love to hear more about your publishing house, because this is, again, incredible, very specific way of helping people to express as well. So maybe people listening are wanting to do that, but pen to paper, how do they even do that? How do you start?
Yeah, it's interesting that, quick context, the reason why I launched the publishing company is because when I looked at the big vision of what I want to do and where I want to be, is I want to have a big production company called Powerful Pictures. And what we do is we only make true story films. That's it. You go into cinema, you're like, okay, I know what I'm in store for. I'm in store for an inspiring true story. You then walk away inspired to take action in your own life, in whatever way that is. And that's what I want to do. And now to get there, it's like, okay, what's the best way to get these true stories? Then that sparked the idea of Powerful Books, which is a publishing company helping trauma survivors turn their story into a book. And each book is going to be a true story. And then eventually we just take each book and turn that into a movie. That's the vision, and that's the path in front of me. Now, in regards to survivors, it's crazy in a good way how many survivors want to write a book. I've got about 4,600 people that join my Facebook, in my Facebook group at the moment. And when they join, they've got to answer 3 questions. Where are they currently at in their life? Have they ever thought about writing a book? And 99% of people say yes to writing a book. And but obviously they haven't done it yet, right? Because the idea of writing their stories is like, whoa, And what I find a lot of the times is, even if they pluck up the courage to start writing, they end up stopping, because they scratch the itch of just getting it out into paper and word vomiting, but then they don't know where to go from there. So I ended up creating, it's called the Powerful Story Framework, and it's essentially a framework that people go through where it's like, right, the book that you want to write, just park that to one side, just forget about it. It doesn't exist right now. Okay, that'll come later on. First, we need to go through 3 main pillars. We're going to go through your story. We're going to have a look at everything. We're going to have it unravel from a bird's eye view. Then we're going to go into message. What's the message that you want to share with the world? What's the message that you want to get across in this book? What's the book structure? What's all the parts? What's all the chapters? What's the message of each chapter? Now let's start writing draft 1. Now you have a plan to follow, right? So then they start doing that. And throughout the whole process, the best part of what we do is we're more than I say publishing company because it's ease of conversation, but it's more of a coaching program. We got weekly calls, 2 calls a week, every 2 weeks. So we've got 2 support calls a week. And then every 2 weeks, we have like a live workshop. Trauma healers, therapists, counselors, barristers, personal development, mindset, inner child healing. They all come in and do a live workshop for all the guys in there. So it's also a healing program to help them become the best version of themselves whilst they're writing the book.
So, gosh, that's a sort of much deeper level than, as you say, pen to paper. And I think you're absolutely right. There is a story in everybody, because life is your story. Life is your own stage. And people don't often know how to tap into that, or even think that they've got a meaningful message to share with the world. And I know you kind of went out and did a TEDx talk as well, and got your message out to the world, and you're getting it out in as many ways and on as many platforms as possible. But it's great that you're giving that guidance for that story sharing, because ultimately it's emotion that evokes people. It's emotion that evokes people to take action in their own lives as well, isn't it? What about happy stories? We're talking obviously about trauma a lot. Is that the key focus for your approach and for your publishing house? Because there's a lot of people's positive stories that also don't get put on pen to paper as well. What do you think about that? We do hear a lot of negative stuff, don't we? We've only got to turn on the TV, listen to the news, it's all there, and it just creates this heaviness to life. But there's a lot of beauty in the world as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There is a lot of beauty in your world. There's a lot of happy stories. And what I made sure to put a strong emphasis on, like, there's a lot of people out there, which we need, who are creating a lot of awareness around abuse. And, they're the campaigners, they're the activists, and we need them, but they're very heavy, right? They're very, very heavy. And I really, really did not want to be one of those heavy hitters. I wanted to be someone who's like, right, here's it's a shit story here. Okay. But there's an inspiring end. Okay, so let's get through this dark path, which is what they went through. Like, for example, yesterday, one of our clients, Bonnie, she launched her book. Crazy story, right? Her dad used her everything you can ever possibly imagine and sold her as a prostitute in the back of his car outside of a bar, right? That was her upbringing. Heavy story, okay? But then when you look at who she is now, you're like, wow, I need to meet this person. Inspiring. I went through sexual abuse, but I didn't go through the same type of abuse as her. Now, I don't compare myself to her and be like, oh, okay, my story's not as good as hers or anything like that. I'm still like, when we watch movies, we're always inspired by that main character, right? And it's the same type of thing. And I just think is how you do it, and it's how you wrap it up at the end to inspire people to take action rather than leaving them depleted and be like, God,
Absolutely. And I think that is the key thing, isn't it? It's that motivation, it's that inspiration, and it's also the mechanisms, giving people the sort of the how, the what.
It's the how, it's the what.
Giving them their why through all of that as well, and making it important as well. So, wow, amazing work. I love, again, pain for so many people does become the thing that's so transformative and eventually becomes that passion, that ignition for their life, and to touch so many other people's lives as well, just exactly the way that you're doing as well. And you're also doing quite a lot of work with charities as well, aren't you? Tell me about, is it We Together that you're working alongside?
Yeah, so there's two charities. So I have a charity in America, and we give free mental health care to child survivors of sexual abuse. And we're actually at the moment doing a transition of bringing it over to the UK. So that's something that we're working on. And then we have a UK charity, We Together. And what we're doing at the moment is we're building out a tool. It's like a database that allows victims and survivors to anonymously self-report what happened to them. And the purpose of this is two. One is to empower them. Like, hey, type in your story. You don't need to give away your identity. If a case happens, and you obviously need to be contacted, right? But it's not like we're putting you on blast from the get-go. So let's put in your story, right? And then it goes into the database. And then with AI, if there's similarities in people's stories, because a lot of time when abuser abuses, not just one person. And if we can, then the AI will then create a cluster of people's similar stories. And then that gets automatically sent to the police. And then they have to look into it. So then the goal is to aid in increasing prosecution rates, because there's not just one voice. There's now a cluster of voices against that one person. Yeah.
So again, you're raising something super, super important, is that a lot of people also, part of the reason they don't say anything, that they don't break their silence, is because they think, well, nothing's going to happen anyway. No one's going to listen to me. No one's going to believe me. A perpetrator, well, they're wearing armor. Nothing's going to happen to them. And here you are using kind of, the time that we're living in. AI is literally everywhere, isn't it? And you're able to use that level of technology to do something that hasn't previously been possible.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the plan. I mean, we still in the building phase for it. We're currently in the phase of fundraising. So that's where we are. We're a couple of years into the charity, and we've, strong board of trustees, and the goal is to try and get into the police and have this system plugged into the police. And we're currently going through Houses of Parliament at the moment. So we're making some good traction, which is great. But yeah, there's a lot of times when people do speak up, nothing happens, unfortunately, which is why I'm like, okay, well, let's in one breath try to make something happen in our system, in law. But at the same time, let me try and help survivors to not put all of their worth on the actions of someone else, because that's outside of their control. How can they get justice from within? How can they feel contempt from within? Because that is within their control. So I try to help both angles there.
Oh, no. And again, brilliant approach. It's a very therapeutic approach as well, which is zoning in on where is your gift of control? What is it that you're going to be able to affect? And as you say, in terms of even breaking the silence, break it to yourself, it's back to what can you change your own kind of perception and approach as well. And so what about you? I mean, you've certainly got a very strong mindset. What do you do in your terms of your own health, and both physical and emotional, to kind of keep that level of strength that I'm seeing today?
I always struggle to answer that question whenever I get asked, because I still haven't gotten the answer. You know, I go to the gym. I don't feel like I need a therapist or someone to. I don't get down from these stories. I think part of me has a healthy disconnect from these messages and from these stories, and a disconnect being I see it and it moves me to take action, but then that's where the disconnect happens, because if there isn't, then it can seep into messing me up for the day, because now the world has just gone to pots and, you know, it's doom and gloom. Whenever I read these stories, I have a very addictive personality in regards to when I set my eyes on something, I have to do it, and I don't see any obstacles in my way. Part of that is daddy issues, because my dad didn't allow me. He didn't give me freedom growing up. You know, I couldn't do many things. He didn't want me to be an actor. You know, all these types of things. It caused me to be an adult. Was like, you know what? F you to the world. I'm going to do big things. I'm going to help a lot of people. Right. So that allows me. So that sort of purpose-driven part of me allows me to push through on a daily basis, all hours of the day, because I'm like, there still needs to be more. There needs to be more done. There needs to be more done. You know, and seeing these people's messages from a response of what I do enables me to move forward. And for me, that is my fuel in the tank.
Yeah. And I'm glad you're kind of saying this of yourself, because it's not a sort of negative disassociation. It's not an I don't care about you disassociation. No. It's a very important one. And, you know, as doctors, we need to do this as well. There's empathy, there's compassion, there's help, there's healing, but there's also a level of, look, self-protection. If I want to do this for as long as possible, I also need to make sure that I'm in my best place to be able to serve you as well, which is exactly what you're doing. What do you sacrifice in the way? Because I'm hearing your passion, I'm hearing your drive, I'm hearing your, you know, once I want something, I'm on it. What do you give up in return for doing
that? I don't feel like I sacrifice anything. I think if one could look, if there was a fly on the wall and they saw what I do on a day to day, because I literally wake up, work until I go to sleep. If I'm not with my girlfriend, then I say to my girlfriend, it's like, whenever I stop working, it's like somebody walking into a room and the kids playing Xbox, and you're like, right, son, it's time to turn off the Xbox now, you know, and you're like, oh no, come on, I want to carry on playing. That's how I feel about what I do. Luckily, you know, I'm very blessed. I hate not working because I just love it so much. And when I'm with my girlfriend, I make sure I have a stop point most of the time, unless there's burning work with the charity or with the business or whatever. Then I ask permission. Do you mind if I work tonight? Because that's a good thing to do in a relationship, right? But most of the time I have a stop off point of about 7 to 8 p.m. Then those evenings I spend with her. When I'm not with her, I'll work from the morning all the way through to the evening. So if there's a fly on the wall, people are like, oh, he's sacrificing his time. He doesn't have any time to himself. But I think for me, that is my time. You know, I could easily game or do, you know, I go to the gym, I go to the cinema. Those are my things. But outside of that, I just work.
Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? I think describing work or career or passion or mission, and it doesn't sound like this fits under a work category, even though it is perhaps, you know, from, you know, it's giving you finances and income and direction, but it sounds as very it's purpose driven. There's a mission, and this is your mission. Do you sleep? Do you sleep well? Do you sleep enough?
I sleep like a baby. I sleep as soon as my head goes onto the pillow. My girlfriend says you're so lucky. If you put on a timer, it wouldn't go past 30 seconds, and I'm asleep every time, and I sleep all the way through. So good. Yeah.
That's giving me a big sense of relief, because I know a lot of people are driven by their passion, by their mission, and the sacrifice that happens is, oh, I'll just do this extra thing. I don't feel like going to sleep now. And before you know it, you're only getting, you know, 3, 4, 5 hours sleep a night. And of course, for your own physiology, that is never going to be enough, and you don't get the quality. But sounds like you're on a thing. So.
Yeah, between 6 to 8 hours I get.
Great. Yeah. Amazing. So I guess we should wrap up. We could carry on talking. Happiness, health in the world. What do you think needs to happen for the world to be happier and healthier? Because I think it can be much happier and healthier than it is right now. What would you say needs to happen?
I think it's interesting. I met up with a therapist yesterday, and she was saying that in one of her trades of work, there's only 200 therapists in the UK that train in it. And she was saying to me how there needs to be a lot more therapists and a lot more mental health support workers and frontliners. So that's one thing that needs to happen, which means, but there's a deeper meaning behind that, right? Which means that mental health and needs to be taken more seriously in this country, I think. And I think that in regards to healthier, I think a lot more people need to see the mental health as a priority, but then also break the silence. You know, I was a speaker at a business conference in Brighton, like last month, I think it was, 300 people there. And I went on stage, everyone's talking about business, but I went on stage, I talked about abuse, and I looked out at everyone. I said, listen, not everyone here has to have been abused, but everyone here knows what it's like to live in silence. And I will guarantee that you'll have your own thing, right, that you've lived in silence about, whatever it is. So you can relate to it to some degree, right? And I'm telling you right now that whatever that is doing something to your internal being. And whether you see that now or in 10 years' time, you will at some point. So I feel like if everybody can confront their own demons, because everyone's got them, right, to some extent, then I feel like in the short term, it's very, very difficult, very, very painful. But in the long term, that's what leads to a healthier and happier life. And I truly believe that, because that allows you to be your authentic self. How can you be your authentic self if you live in silence about something?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah. Powerful, powerful stuff. Perry Power. I'm sure you hear this.
What can I say?
Break the silence and express, back to what you were saying earlier, is allow yourself to have a way of expressing that fits you, that works for you, that allows you to be original and unique and authentic and you, and tap into your own identity, because we are all individual. There's nothing the same about any of our DNA, and yet we've all got things that connect us. Like you said, everyone will have experienced being silent, and so we can all experience breaking that silence as well.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Perry. I don't want to stop the conversation, but we must. It's been incredibly warming speaking to you. I feel your passion. I feel your energy behind this. I feel the inspiration and the motivation. And I love that you haven't taken us to a place of heaviness, but actually a place of lightness and uplift. And I know that there will be people listening who will do exactly what you've said today, which is break a silence that they haven't been able to before. So really appreciate you doing what you do.
I appreciate you having me on, and I'm glad that you mentioned that in regards to I didn't bring you down, but rather I raised you up. That's the whole point of it.
Yeah.
You know? So that's great.
Amazing. Thank you. Wow, just 28 with a depth of clarity on his mission and his vision, and now using his personal learnings from his silence and breaking his silence to support so many, many others who are in need as well. What I will do is I will put the links to Perry's social media and his publishing house in the show notes. So please, if any of this conversation has resonated with you in any way, and I know this may have made hard listening for some of you and has raised emotion in some of you as well. If that is you, please, please do not feel that you are alone. Do message Perry directly if you'd like to. I know he responds to every individual message. And of course, as always, if you want support, I am here. Please do just reach out to me as well, please. Now, one thing that Perry did talk about was expression, having ways to express your experiences and emotions in ways that are beyond what we're used to in terms of verbal communication. So what I want to do next week is look in more depth at creative expression and really zone in on what creative expression is and what are the different ways that you can express more creatively, and really thinking about, well, how does it benefit your health? And as always, looking at the science as well. What does the neuroscience tell us about creativity? So I'm looking forward to next week and exploring and sharing this with you as well. And in the meantime, of course, as always, I wish you a health activating day.